Hi, welcome back. Henry Winter and John Helm are my special guests this week. They were introduced in full at the start. They didn't really need any introduction, and they're not going to get any more introduction from me at this point. But very grateful and very honoured to have these two great guys of the press box and the commentary box with us. We're talking supporters, Henry and John, in part one. And there is this nagging uncertainty, isn't there? It's not just about when supporters are going to be allowed back in what numbers. It's also, is there going to be a willingness among football supporters and a desire and an appetite to spend their money as before and fill the stadiums as we came to accept as the norm? Is there a danger, Henry, that may not happen because of this break of habit?
I think maybe it will for some people. I think emotionally, some people will find it difficult to go back if they've lost a loved one, say a parent who took them to games, and they can't face the thought of familiar rituals without someone who sadly passed away during COVID. So I think that will be difficult. But I think the majority of people will want to go back. They'll want to get back to some kind of whatever the new normal is, get back to the rituals of going to the pub, meeting up with friends, the humour, the contact. We're fortunate we're able to go to games and actually talk to people in the press box and the commentary box, even if it is socially distanced. We can have a chat, but so many people have actually been cut off from that, and that's why clubs have been very conscientious and have been ringing around isolated and elderly fans just to sort of check on them. I think there is a great football's such a huge part of our lives, not simply our working lives, but if we weren't working in this great game, we'd be going to games, we'd be going down to the pubs, which gloriously will reopen soon, and talking about the game. So I think, you look at football in this country, the fact, if you go down into sort of tier 3, the crowds there, you don't get that anywhere else in the world. We are a country obsessed with it. We came up with the sport, we codified it, we spread it around to the world, as well as sort of Scottish sailors and other people understand all that. But we are the heartbeat of the world's game. I think probably only if I go to one or two other countries, say like Italy and Brazil, and a few South American countries, maybe one or two places in Africa, do they have this extraordinary obsession? Like if you get into a taxi or if you're sitting opposite someone on a train, within 30 seconds, the chances are you'd have found out which football club they support. I think that just goes, it's just part of our life. So I do think that it will all resume, Alan. And I just think it's so important for people, for people's mental health. There's so much focus on that, just going there and just letting off steam, even if it's letting off steam at VAR. I think people will be keen to go back.
Although I've known, turning to John, people saying to me, I've saved £5,000 this year or £6,000 this year. I've got out of the habit. I'm not sure I'm going to go back. I've watched games on TV. I'm not sure I'm going to go back. Have you detected that, John? And is that a concern?
I can't say I've detected that, Alan. In fact, what I would say is that the appetite has actually grown with some people. You're quite right, and we might lose one or two people for good reasons, as Henry mentioned, especially if somebody's lost a loved one through COVID. But I think the appetite is always going to be there. And one thing I noticed at the start of this pandemic, when crowds were still allowed in at the lower league, at non-league level, if you remember, for a short time, there were 400 or 500 people allowed. I went to a game at Pontefract Collieries. I went to another one at Barn Knowleswick, locally pronounced as Barlick, and there were more there because they said we simply have to get out. We want to get back to some normality, just as we're all looking forward, I think, next week to being able to go to a pub, albeit sitting outside, al fresco, eating and drinking outside. I think the appetite has actually grown amongst a lot of people. There will be, you're quite right, there will be some people who say we're now out of the habit, we're not going to bother now, we can watch it on the telly. I think for every one of those, there might be two who say, well, hang on, we do want to go to football. They might not necessarily go to the same club. They might decide to support their local club rather than, go to one of the giants of the game. It might actually benefit some of the non-league clubs. That was my experience.
Well, it was my experience too, and I like nothing more of a midweek if I'm not working than going to Hallam FC, an historic ground there, to Sheffield FC, even more historic, to Handsworth, to Worksop Town. And Henry, the one thing I've noticed, as John has, is that when they were allowed, crowds were rising unmistakably at that level. It was almost as if people were reconnecting with the real game and the way it should be played. There was no cheating or very little, no play acting. It was hard but fair. There was no animosity and raucous behaviour in the ground. I think that people want to see what you described in the first half as a reset for the game as a whole.
And a reminder how important the pyramid is. And this is something that whenever I talk to individuals at the elite clubs, whether it's chief executives or managers, and particularly there was this issue of should they be helping out the clubs down the pyramids who were really struggling. And I've got friends who are secretaries at tier 3 clubs, and they were so close to going to the wall. And if you look at the England national team, I think 20 of the 23 who went to the last World Cup in Russia were either came through EFL academies or had experience in the grassroots. It's absolutely, the pyramid is so important. It is, the Egyptians built pyramids for a reason, to keep, the strength at the bottom would create the strength at the top. And I think that is absolutely vital. But one of the other reasons I think fans will head back into clubs, and I know we're talking about many Sheffield clubs here, but I can stretch it slightly further north up the M1 to Leeds. Can you imagine what Ellen Road will be like when it is packed, when the fans are back for the first home game, whether they do manage one this season, whether it's at the start of next season? And I know Andrea Rajatsani and the club will handle this with decorum, but saying farewell to 4 of their greatest ever players who passed away in the past year. I just wrote them down, and it's they're titans of the game: Norman Hunter, Jack Charlton, Trevor Cherry, Peter Lorimer. The opportunity for fans to go in and say farewell. I mean, it's going to be I'm not a Leeds fan, but I will want to cover that game because it will be so emotional. And because I grew up I'm 58, so my sort of growing awareness of football was sort of early 70s, and that Leeds team then. And these are just extraordinary names. And for supporters, and this will be echoed at all clubs, and supporters of those clubs. Frank Worthington played in your district, people like that, people want to say farewell. I think it's going to be so emotional going back in. I think fans will find it strange going back into grounds, but the desire for that is just, I'm sure fans are already counting down the days.
John, you've lost some friends that were named there only this year. You knew all those guys well.
Oh, very much so. I'm delighted that Henry has mentioned that quartet of Leeds United players. Not as famous was another old Leeds United player from the same era called Rod Johnson. He's passed away. And what Henry says there, Manchester City with Colin Bell, Manchester United with Nobby Stiles. I have a little magazine here called Backpass, and the obituary column in that is full of names that we all know. So as Henry said, every club will want to acknowledge and recognise the contribution made by one of those great players. We've lost so many over these last 12 months that it would be only right. And as Henry says, to go to Ellen Road, the first time a crowd is allowed in there will be such a moving, such an emotional experience. There is absolutely no question about it. But just to get back, by the way, to the issue about the local clubs as well, at Bradford Park Avenue, we've put in a 3G pitch, which is going to bring in a lot of income for us. And you've been at Harrogate recently. They had to rip their 3G pitch up because they got promoted. How ironic is that? And the same will happen if Sutton United get promoted. So I think it's a little bit unfortunate that I would hope that rules can be changed. These pitches are fantastic nowadays. They're not like the old ones that we saw at Oldham and Luton and QPR where the players got burns. I just think it's wrong, really, that these clubs who've invested and are making a lot of money, quite rightly so, by helping the local communities to use these facilities, are not going to be able to do so. We have to rip the pitch off if they get promoted. It just seems a bit wrong to me, does that?
Indeed. Well, good luck to Sutton United. I mean, that's an extraordinary story. I was looking at the top of the National League the other day because I've got a particular interest as a Chesterfield supporter. And all the top 7 or 8 were former esteemed Football League clubs, and the one exception are the leaders, Sutton United, in a league, of Wrexham and Chesterfield and Notts County. It's absolutely remarkable. Henry, in terms of football and crowds, it's not satisfactory for TV either, and therefore devalues what football can expect to generate from broadcasting and from TV companies if you haven't got a crowd there, because you're selling a spectacle that ain't right.
I know, and I think in fairness to the broadcasters, they have done a remarkable job, but it all comes back to the fans. It all comes back to this reset. But this essential point that we've been discussing is how supporters will feel going back in. They're not simply going back into the grounds. It is about their love of the game, and it's also about playing the game. And we have an issue in this country with obesity. It's something I've written on countless occasions. And whatever you think of the Prime Minister, he used a phrase, and he probably should use it on himself as well as the country, but he said we've got to get the country match fit. So one of the issues of COVID is, and I'm sure there'll be the great intellectuals of this country, the medical experts will do an inquest in the years to come, and they will analyse why we have been so vulnerable to COVID. Was there an issue with the state of health of many people in this country? And we've got to look at that. We know there's a rising obesity issue in this country. If you talk to one or two academy directors, they say they do have an issue, and they would sometimes want to get players in from overseas because their health is slightly better than some of the local kids. We've got to address that, and one of the reasons I think we can do that is through the power of sport, not simply through football. You live in a great sporting area. You've had you had the World Student Games. Was it in '91? Was it? I think that was one of the first things I sort of covered. And I can remember covering an extraordinary story of one of the elite runners from overseas who went out for a run and was found halfway down the M1. I remember it was an extraordinary thing. But that thing is, we've got to get this country fit again, and that is why football. In terms of getting people to come back in to watch games, in terms of what John was talking about, using the facilities for the community, whether it's 3D pitches, and it's frustrating when this country is crying out for more 3G pitches because of the weather, and the government is pouring money into it, and the FA are trying to pour money into it, but it's needed all over. But my local non-league club, Stamford Town in Lincolnshire, they've put in a grass pitch for the first team because they've got quite an ambitious first team, about tier 8. And then they've got a 3G pitch. They sold up their most beautiful ancestral home where they've been for 120 years. And it broke a lot of people's hearts because it had one of the most beautiful views in the country. It looked across this beautiful Georgian market town, which gets used for all the sort of Jane Austen films. And it got moved slightly out of town, but the facilities are fantastic there. And they've got a 3G pitch, which all the local kids use. So when there's a game going on, a lot of the people will go in and watch the game, and then some of the kids will still be kicking around outside. That's what we've got to do with this country. We've got to get fit as a country again. And football, as the heart of the community, with a conscience, with increasingly the facilities, more money needs investing in grassroots. We've got to do that. So get fans back into grounds, get people fit again, and football can be the catalyst for that.
Yeah, Handsworth, I would quote in this area as having a wonderful 3G pitch, and they hire it out right the way through the week. I think both the Sheffield clubs use it for junior matches, and that very much is the way to go. John, the appetite for football, for fans going to the grounds, but also for watching it on TV. You've had a phenomenal experience in India. I mean, we're used to seeing TV audiences in the low millions, aren't we, in this country for major domestic matches, and some games on Sky, are significantly less than that. Tell me about the audiences you were broadcasting to on your travels in India.
Yeah, well, I've been at the Indian Super League for all of its 7 seasons now. And then the initial idea was to get more people interested in the game, to challenge cricket almost in that country. And the viewing figures have gone up and up and up. And after the first game this new season, I asked about it. The local derby there is the Calcutta derby between ATK Mohun Bagan, that stands for Athletic Club de Kolkata, Mohun Bagan, and East Bengal. And our audience was 86 million. Just the 86 million. India is a very vastly populated country, as you realise, and that didn't challenge the cricket, but it's getting closer and closer. And by the way, before these restrictions, and there were no fans allowed in India, by the way, there were still no fans allowed. We played behind closed doors. When ATK and East Bengal play one another, the crowd is usually 120,000 at the Salt Lake Stadium in Calcutta. Okay, they pay 50 rupees to get in. But it is a phenomenal experience, absolutely phenomenal experience. And the appetite has grown and grown and grown. And what they're doing in India now, in the first season, they had people like Alessandro Del Piero, Nicholas Anelka, Roberto Carlos, all playing. And it generated fantastic enthusiasm. So all of the crowds, Kerala's average crowd was 65,000 in the first season. Russell Osborne was my co-commentator. We could not believe the atmosphere in the stadiums in Calcutta and Goa and even Guwahati, which is a vastly populated area. And they love their football there as much as their cricket, by the way. But that's what they were doing. But now we said you've got to get the average age of the players down, because it was about 34 or something like that then. Now the average age of the 11 clubs, there are now 11, is down to 28. And yes, they're still importing players from all around the world, and particularly from Australia, by the way, because the A-League has almost collapsed in comparison. The players get exceedingly well paid, and the audience, as you referred to now, the television audience has absolutely rocketed and is just going in one way.
Absolutely phenomenal. Phenomenal indeed. Can I just bring you back to the Sheffield clubs? I know it's not your area of speciality, Henry, because you have grander venues to go to, but you're broadly interested in the game, and this historic city is really struggling at the moment. Just specifically looking at Sheffield Wednesday, have had 4 or 5 managers this season, and that's never a recipe for success. The latest of them being Darren Moore. And amid the struggle to stay up, I can see a few green shoots of recovery in the way that he's getting them to play rather more positively, and clearly the way that players are enjoying playing for him. He is a manager with a real future, I would have thought, Henry.
Yeah, I've known Darren for a while as a player and as a coach and a manager, and he's a very charismatic, very modest, quite humble. I mean, you've obviously met him, you know him. He's quite sort of almost sort of respectful person, and I don't often find managers particularly respectful to journalists on the whole, quite rightly. And I think he's a good. I mean, I was slightly surprised. I thought Nigel Pearson might have had a chance. I remember we bumped into each other, didn't we? We sat at Bramall Lane and we were having a coffee, socially distanced, yeah. And we were talking about whether Nigel, because I'd spent a bit of time with Nigel recently, and I thought, was it the right time necessarily for him to go back? I knew he wanted to get back in, but he's obviously got an emotional connection there. But I'm so pleased for Darren, because he is a good guy. I mean, you can see the result the other day. I mean, that was terrific. But I think at some point you just have to look at the board. You have to look at the owners. If you are having such a turnover of managers, maybe have a look at some of the players as well. I'm not completely familiar with the whole setup. Just looking at it from the outside, it doesn't seem to be as completely well run a club as it should be. But in terms of Darren Moore, if you want someone who is going to give totally of himself, he will just be the first one in a training, the last one out, who will work absolutely, because he was frustrated by what happened at West Brom. He's got a point to prove. I think he's aware as a black manager that he is the role model for many within the game, particularly players who are wanting to step into coaching and into management. I think he understands that, and I think it motivates him even more. So I think Sheffield Wednesday have got a very driven man. I don't know whether he's going to be the new Pep or the new Jurgen. I very much doubt it, because they are pretty much unique. But I think he cares. He will care about not simply the players. He will care about the staff. He will care about the sort of the whoever's on reception. He will care about the groundsman. He's a very human man. You look at some of the things he's done for charity down the years. I think he walked up Kilimanjaro, and he's done all these remarkable things. What was the Great Wall of China? I don't know, he's probably did both of them in the same day. He's got huge appetite for sort of life, huge energy. So no, I think he's a good man, and I wish him well. And if the players have got his work ethic, they've got a chance.
Yeah, good person, and typically, and it's a bit of a cliche, never hear a bad word said about him, about Darren Moore from anybody, which is pretty remarkable in football. John, Sheffield United and following Chris Wilder, I was going to say those are big boots. They're huge boots, aren't they?
They are, because just as Henry was referring to Darren being a good man, and I couldn't have echoed it even better. Those are exactly the right words. Chris is a good man, and the media love him because he's so helpful to us, as Graham Taylor always used to be. There aren't many, as you say, in football, but Chris is going to be almost impossible to replace in one sense. I think they need to go in an almost totally different direction in the sort of person that they do appoint, because Chris has left such an indelible mark on that club. You think, how on earth is he going to be replaced? Because there is nobody like Chris Wilder. His love of the club to start with, that was his favourite club as a boy. You don't find too many of those around nowadays. And I've been racking my brains while we've been talking here, trying to think. Chris Wilder's available, but who else can I think who is available who would fill those boots? And I'm struggling. I'm really struggling to come up with a name. And yet there are hundreds of managers out there who are without work. I was delighted to see, by the way, that Nigel Adkins got the job at Charlton, because he's another who falls into that same category. And he got a good start the other day. He got a great result at Doncaster, didn't he? And you want the good guys to succeed. But as to who will step in at Bramall Lane, only the owner knows, and only he knows what type of person he wants. He could surprise us all by bringing in another foreign manager. Look, what the guy at Barnsley has done a phenomenal job, hasn't he, in the course of this year? So they are out there, but it's a question of finding them.
Henry, what have been your observations from afar about the split? Effectively, it was a clash between owner and manager at Sheffield United. Were you surprised in any way, or were you, like those of us closer to it, clued in and not surprised?
Probably sort of halfway between the two. Ultimately, looking at it from the outside, incredibly disappointed that the two parties couldn't work for the best of the club. And clearly, the owner should be looking at an individual like Chris Wilder. I've met him on a few occasions. He's just a remarkable individual. He is Sheffield United through and through. He is. And I think in a strange way, Sheffield United needs someone who understands the roots in the community, who understands that it's important to have that connection. And he's, how he inspired. I mean, it's interesting talking to some of the players, on the record and off the record. A couple of them I got to know a bit, and just sort of talking to them off the record, and just his personality, his energy. And look, you're quite right. He's great with the media, but I wouldn't want to cross him. I mean, we do this thing in the press box at the start of every season. We have basically a list, a sort of jokey list of which managers you most like to go for a drink with, and which managers you'd also want alongside you in a fight. Now, I have to say, I'm not a particularly pugilistic character, and if a fight broke out in my local wine bar, I would disappear pretty sharpish. But I think that Chris Wilder is the type of individual you want to go for a drink with, and you knew that if he was on your side, you would have someone really sort of strong there. He's a very impressive individual, great sense of humour. I wouldn't want to cross him, and I just think that's what you want in a manager. And I just think he was perfect. So they should have worked it out, whether it was investment in the training ground, whether it was investment in contracts for players or expanding or whatever Chris wanted. Even if the owner felt he was being too demanding, even if he felt that the tensions were too much, the manager is the most important person in the club. For the owner to succeed, and I can't believe he's not got some long-term sort of financial motivation with the club. It just makes sense, to stay in the Premier League, and most importantly, to keep the individual who could keep you in the Premier League, and to keep whatever Chris Wilder wanted. just give it to him, because the alternative will be even more expensive. I mean, good luck to the person who comes in next. Of all the grounds I've been to, there are probably 2 or 3 where I think they've missed fans most. And I think that Sheffield United have missed supporters. Just in a flip sense, West Ham have been able to flourish without their fans, because the fans were getting on the back of the owners a little bit at the start of the season or last year with the manager. But it's funny. I mean, I did a piece a couple of years ago on my favourite derbies around the world. And I think a few people were surprised because I had the Sheffield derby in my top 10. And I said that it's not a sort of world-renowned Classico or Old Firm or Liverpool, Manchester United, or maybe even North London derby. But I can remember, I mean, Alan, you would have been there. John, you were probably there too. It was about 6-7 years ago. For some reason, it was a Friday night at Bramall Lane, obviously a night game. And there was a absolutely charming couple in front who I was sort of talking to. They said, "Oh, you know, you've come along to watch the match," and they talked about Sheffield, what a great city it was, and Sheffield United season ticket holders, and they were utterly charming. I think one of them was a lot like a librarian, but anyway, very sensible community people. The moment Sheffield Wednesday ran out, oh, the language! Whoa! I mean, it's like they're completely turned, you know, Jekyll and Hyde, and. That's so. I mean, the edge and the atmosphere, the edge, and all that. So look, it's a fantastic derby. For me, it's a huge footballing city, and you want to see them climbing back up again. And in terms of Sheffield United, Chris Wilder, who for me represented the fans, represented the dressing room, represented. Now, was he manager of the year last year? You keep someone like him. You sort out whatever politics, finances there are, and you build around Chris Wilder. Huge own goal by the owner.
I totally agree, Henry. I really do. It was sad, but in my view, avoidable. And whether you're talking in terms of a resignation, a sacking, or a parting by mutual consent, it amounts to the same thing. Sheffield United have lost one of their greatest ever managers. Period. End of story. That's where it's at the moment, in my opinion. We're going to finish with England. It's not often we relegate them to the bottom of the show, but I detect a little bit of national disinterest whenever England are mentioned in the approach to a major tournament. Can John, this England, this very exciting England, engage the public and do well at the Euros and get us all rooting for them? What do you think?
Well, why not would be my answer to that. And I think Gareth is very astute in this. If you remember before the World Cup, he got all the media together and he got all the 23 members of his squad together down at St George's Park. And everybody was invited in and it generated a great atmosphere. Then out came the waistcoat and we were laughing that we were all behind Gareth Southgate there. And I do detect that he's doing something rather similar. He's obviously had to change quite a few members of the squad, but I have a feeling he's clever in doing this. And Henry was talking earlier about the number of names and the number of good young English players coming through. And now we're discussing 4 right backs. Is Trent Alexander-Arnold going to make it ahead of Trippier and Walker and James? He could be left out of the squad. The one area I think where we'd have a big problem would be if Harry Kane got injured. I saw a debate the other day saying the centre half's a big problem as well. But we've had people standing in, your Calvert-Lewins, your Codys, and people you wouldn't have thought of a year ago have made their international debuts. And there's still people like Patrick Bamford banging on the door who's not even had a look in yet. So I think we have to retain an optimism before we go in there. I don't want it to be over flooded. I don't want us to say we're going to go and win the Euros. Of course, we don't know that. You can never guarantee anything like that. But I do believe, and Henry deals with Gareth far more than I do. I know Gareth, but Henry knows him well. I think he's got a strange ability to get the country right behind the players. I'm not saying a funny thing to say, a strange ability, but none of the previous managers since Bobby Robson probably were able to do that. So I do think that we have a chance of doing very well, but more importantly, getting the entire population supporting England and flying the flag. I really do believe that.
It's interesting, Alan, you say that there's national disinterest going into the tournament. I mean, we thought that in Russia, and then I was sort of turned on the television in my hotel room in St. Petersburg and looked at the scenes back home, and everyone's throwing beer in the air. So I think there's I think John is right. I think Gareth has taken the heat and the nerve and the hype and the expectation and all the footballs coming home, sort of trimmings out of it. I think the last tournament that England went into going rah, 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 blowing their trumpet was 2006. Obviously didn't qualify for 2008. I think the coverage and the expectations have been pretty balanced since then. You know, the longer you get away from 66, you've obviously got to be more reasoned and reasonable in your expectations. But I think, you know, you talk about the quality of the players. I mean, I watched Jude Bellingham last night for Borussia Dortmund against Manchester City and saw his work off the ball, saw his running, saw his confidence, denied ludicrously a very good goal. And, you know, is he going to get on? I mean, everyone talks about getting on the plane for the Euros. I mean, basically England are at Wembley. I mean, I think it's, you know, who's going to get on the National Express bus to Burton to George's Park? I think is I think that's where, you know, we're not all heading down to Heathrow or Luton to get a flight somewhere. So I think England have got, so I'm glad Southgate's gone to a back four. I think that suits the players. But you look at a player like Kyle Walker, who looks like England's first choice right back at the moment, and I think he's more comfortable in that position. I think Harry Maguire. I'm sort of talking, obviously, of throwing in some of these names with sort of Sheffield connections, and people talk about Maguire and should he be in the you know, in the team? He's such a leader. He will always start for Southgate. And another one who's been on your patch. I mean, the game I covered at Barnsley the other night, the Chelsea game, and John was saying how generous they've been. I went there and they put, rather sweetly, they put us in a corporate box and gave us some sweets and said, that's the pitch, cover the match, see you afterwards. And they were utterly charmed. But on the wall was a lovely picture of John Stones. And again, that's a reflection of how important the EFL clubs are in terms of Barnsley developing John Stones, who then goes on to Everton, Manchester City, now going to win the league and will go on. And it's already done well for England. So I think England do have talent there. I slightly worry about the defence making mistakes at some point. I'm a huge Jordan Pickford fan, but I think there's a little bit of pressure coming from Nick Pope and Dean Henderson, who you obviously know well. What I like about Dean Henderson, he's fearless. If he makes a mistake, he just boxes it off and gets on with the game. Very confident individual. We're seeing that at Manchester United now. So, look, I think it's psychologically with England. I think we've always had the players, but I think Southgate has taken the heat out of the shirt. I think, look, France and Belgium are clearly better teams, technically, probably tactically as well. But I think this young team, building towards the World Cup in Qatar, the time of year it is, English players won't be knackered in November and December. So maybe looking towards next year with a little bit more confidence. But listen, there will be some moments this summer when fans in beer gardens all over the country certainly won't be showing any national interest. And the brewers will be delighted because they're seeing all these pints going up in the air and their profits soaring too.
It's a great spectacle to look forward to, and a note of optimism to finish on. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be in one of those beer gardens. I'm not so sure I'm going to be throwing my beer in the air. It's far, far too precious for that. But I'd just like to thank John Helm and Henry Winter for a whole hour of conversation. We could go on for many more hours into the night and tomorrow morning, but we finish it there. And I hope you at home have enjoyed having these two great operators giving the benefit of their football knowledge. Henry, John, thanks very much indeed. We'll see you again for another show very soon. Bye-bye now. Bye.